Okay, hello everyone. My name is Carabeth Poe and I am the current chair of the McConnell Scholars Body. Welcome to the 2025 Constitution Day celebration. As many of you know, this is an annual dinner to kick off the McConnell Center celebration of Constitution Day and its enduring significance. Tonight also allows us to say farewell to the Strategic Broadening Seminar cohort. This weekend, they will be traveling with Megan and Dr. Greg to Washington, D.C. As they conclude their time with their center. You all have been an incredible and engaging class. I know I speak for the scholars, and we have truly enjoyed your presence, from the thoughtful conversations to those occasional lunches in the student lounge. It is my pleasure to welcome one of those outstanding soldiers to the podium to represent their class. For brief remarks on behalf of his class and to take us to dinner with an invocation, please welcome First Sergeant Marcus Smith McGee.
Well, thank you and good evening. So before we get started, and I bless the food, if I could get Megan and Dr. Greg up here. So we would just like to acknowledge Dr. Greg, Megan, the faculty members, the scholars, on behalf of SBS Class 2025. We cannot say thank you enough for creating such a program for senior leaders, which drives our imagination, teaches us true reflection on who we are, and providing a concept of why we serve this country each and every day. Since day one, we have witnessed not only professionalism, but how Megan has quickly become an Uber driver to help the team out. How Dr. Greg is a Steelers fan, but also a Bears fan at the same time. And then how the scholars failed at the cultural negotiations with some pretty professionals, okay? No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, these past 2 weeks in Louisville have been very well worth it. And we recommend this to any leadership within our organization so that they can build that success as well. So if Sergeant Major Russell and Maria can come up and present them with a corn, it's just a little token of our appreciation for SBS 2025 class.
Just for now.
Just for now. Take a picture?
Thank you, class.
Russell.
Get a picture?
Tom. Thanks, guys.
All right, I know everybody's hungry. He said it was going to be brief. All right. So if you would please bow your heads and pray with me in a manner that best suits you. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for today and are blessed to share this experience with the people to our left and our right. We ask that you help us disseminate the information we have learned at the McConnell Center back to our organizations to help build better relationships and foster a positive environment. We ask that as we continue this educational journey, that you help us to understand humility, love, and courage to make this world a better place. We also ask your blessings over the food we are about to partake, help it nourish our bodies, and bless the hands that made it. In your holy name we pray. Amen. Thank you.
Tonight I have the pleasure of introducing our featured speaker, Dr. Marc Landy. Dr. Landy's first teaching job I learned tonight was at Alice Lloyd College in my neck of the woods, so we've had some really good conversations going at our table about Eastern Kentucky. Dr. Landy is the Edward and Lewis Professor of American History and Government at Ashland University and a Professor of Political Science at Boston College. He is the co-author of Presidential Greatness and the widely used textbook, American Government, Enduring Principles, Critical Choices. His other works include the Environmental Protection Agency from Nixon to Clinton, as well as several edited volumes of regulatory reform and public policy. Tonight he will be speaking on his most recent book with Dennis Howell, Keeping the Republic, A Defense of American Constitutionalism. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Marc Landy.
As Carabeth indicated, I actually lived in Kentucky, love Kentucky. I want to thank, above all, the McConnell Center and Gary, Greg, and Megan for this wonderful opportunity. I want to thank all the people, all the uniformed people sitting here for your service. I'm a great fan of the American military, and you guys, you do a great job, and we love you. Okay. But I've got some fairly unpleasant things to talk about. The Constitution, and I call it the constitutional order, because it's not just a written document, and I think we'll have reasons to, pardon me, I just screwed up my timer here. The Constitution is under attack. The constitutional order that has preserved our security, stability, and liberty is now under attack from two directions, left and right. That's my damn time. That phone stole my thunder. I'm going to start again. The constitutional order is under attack. And the attack comes from opposite directions. I'm going to read you a headline in the New York Times by a Harvard law professor and a Yale law professor. The Constitution is broken and should not be reclaimed. This is simply a more hyperbolic expression of a point of view that has become increasingly prominent in the writings of law professors, journalists, political scientists, and even some politicians who deem the Constitution to not only being broken, but I'm quoting here, paralyzing, undemocratic, and obsolete. The dean of the University of California, Berkeley Law School, his recent book is subtitled, How the Constitution Threatens America. This anti-constitutional crowd has become strangely muted, actually, since Trump's election. I think what really has taken some of the wind out of their sails is he won the popular vote. Right, as long as we had a kind of succession of Republicans who lost the popular vote and won the Electoral College is the villain above all. These critics abhor such non-democratic, and they are non-democratic, constitutional elements as the Electoral College, the Senate, the amendment process, the presidential veto, and the lifetime appointments of Supreme Court justices. But underlying these complaints is a deeper critique of the spirit of the Constitution and of the mass republic which it founded. That spirit, indeed America itself, is said to be inherently undemocratic, excessively individualistic, greedy, inegalitarian, and corrupt. Because the nation's founders did not abolish slavery, the Constitution itself is often said to be an instrument of racism. If anyone wants to talk about that particular matter in question and answer, I'm happy to get back to it. It is also insufficiently protective of rights, and because it is so difficult to amend, it forces the living to be governed by the dead. Jefferson and Madison had a remarkably great argument over that point. Best of friends, but Jefferson said we should renew the Constitution every 20 years, roughly. Madison said, reverence, friends, reverence. That doesn't come when you throw something away every 20 years. From the opposite partisan direction, President Trump too seeks to disrupt the constitutional order. Expressing his bitterness about the 220 election that was stolen from him, he said that such a massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. Asked on Meet the Press if he needed to uphold the Constitution as president, he responded, "I don't know. I have to respond by saying, again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me, and they're going to obviously follow what the Supreme Court says. So the Constitution is for lawyers." I think there is almost no more damaging point of view than that the Constitution is for lawyers. No, the Constitution is for us. Lawyers have developed a pretty bad habit of screwing it up. Okay, so President Trump is flagrantly and frequently evading many laws and regulations and the constitutional principles on which they rest, notably eliminating federal departments, which of course are created by act of Congress, firing a member of the Federal Reserve Board for an unproven fraud on the basis of an unproven fraud allegation committed before she was appointed to the board, and thus that have no connection to board activities, denying birthright citizenship, retaliating against law firms that have challenged him in court, and using claims of emergency to evade statutory deportation procedures and tariff policy. And of course, the court just kind of whacked him on the tariff policy. Despite having twice taken an oath to preserve and defend the Constitution, he appears to share his progressive enemies' contempt for constitutional constraint. When we wrote our book, the whole book was oriented toward criticizing the progressives because they were the ones who were challenging the Constitution. And now it's become a bipartisan kind of process, and I'm terribly worried about it. In opposition to both progressives and Trump, I argue that the Constitution serves to reconcile liberty and the popular will with an effective and therefore energetic government. It was created to counter the two major threats to liberty: government authoritarianism and tyranny of the majority. To prevent government authoritarianism, the framers sought to limit the power of the central government. Article 1 enumerates what powers the government may exercise. President Trump, it may exercise no other. The separation of powers and checks and balances provide institutional relationships designed to protect those limits. But arguably, the most important check of all is that great residual power held by the states. Today, we tend to view the Bill of Rights as being devoted to protecting the liberties of minorities, which of course it is. But as a better Yale professor who did not damn the Constitution, the wonderful Akhil Reed Amar has astutely observed, the 10 Amendments originally applied only to the federal government, trusting the states to be better guardians of liberty than a distant central government. Further checks are provided by the great power the Constitution vests in the people themselves. All criminal cases and civil cases involving more than a mere $20 call for trial by jury. 12 ordinary people have more power to determine the outcome of a trial or of a civil dispute than does a judge himself. Thus, the Constitution exists to cope with the problem that we can call agentry. Although we are free to choose our representatives and indirectly choose the president, we have precious little control over them in the interim between elections. Obviously, this agent problem only worsens when the representative aspect of the federal government is dwarfed by hordes of bureaucrats and unelected agency commissioners and their hired staffs. So I don't call it a swamp, but it's a problem, right? How do you democratically control this huge apparatus? Okay, so though they did not anticipate this fourth branch of government, the checks on the agents of government that were put in place remain the best means for curbing this form of agentry as well. And I'll get back to that when I talk a little bit about the Congress. It is equally critical, as the framers recognized, to prevent tyranny, not only by agents of the government, but the tyranny of our worst selves, the tyranny of the majority. Today's most vociferous constitutional critics think that America should be a majoritarian democracy rather than the mitigated, I'm emphasizing that word, the mitigated democracy the Constitution creates. Trump's notion that he governs for the people, that the popular will is with him, echoes this fallacy. The left critics, as well as Trump, imply that if all the obstacles to majority rule that the Constitution establishes were removed, the American people would be freer, more egalitarian, less the victims of corruption, and better government. To which I say, no. The Constitution mitigates democracy, not because it opposes popular rule, but because it seeks to discipline popular rule by imposing restraints. It erects hurdles, not barriers, for the majority to overcome. It constrains democracy in order to discourage impulsive democracy, the idea that majorities should obtain their goals in real time. As Dennis Hale in my book, Keeping the Republic, see, you're from Eastern Kentucky, you wanted them to be Hall. Eastern Kentucky is full of Halls. No, this is Hale. As our book, Keeping the Republic, A Defense for American Constitutionalism, depicts, attacks on the Constitution are not confined to contemporary legal scholars, political scientists, and a sitting president. They date back as far as the Anti-Federalists and are present in the writing of such critical voices as Henry David Thoreau, William Lloyd Garrison, Edward Bellamy, Herbert Crowley, Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt and his Brains Trust, and the new left thinkers who emerged in the 1960s. Central argument I want to make is that the Constitution provides for a free government precisely because it places effective limits on both the national government and on tyranny of the majority. That the people should rule is a given. That evanescent public opinion or presidential fiat should rule is preposterous. The limits that the Constitution places on American political life are not a problem. They are a response to a problem. The problem is the difficulty, even the danger of popular government in a massive modern state. The United States was the first large modern state and the first to seriously confront the challenges that such an enterprise poses for Republican government, right? Hundreds of millions of people governed by law, respectful of rights. This is a tough deal. The American constitutional framework embodied a measured and wise response to those problems at the time it was written, and it remains the best framework for coping with the problems modernity poses for America today. The framers understood many of those problems, and they thought very carefully about how to deal with those problems, how to embrace modernity without simply embracing it in order to tame it. Right? We all love modernity. You get to my age, there's nothing that's more inspiring than modern medical technology. It's really fabulous. But there are problems, right? The modern state is enormous in scale. I've already said that. It's true that there are also some small modern states, but they exist at the sufferance of the large ones. That could easily conquer them if they chose to. The U.S. is not Switzerland. Before the modern period, large political entities were empires rather than nations, and they lacked the level of political integration, stable borders, and administrative control that modern states enjoy. Scale doesn't just mean acreage, it means people. And large populations are more important than large territories. It's inevitable that the vast populations of modern states will bring diversity with them. Modern states, therefore, typically encompass many different ethnic, cultural, racial, and religious groups. Sometimes these diverse elements are separated somewhat into different regions and locales, but often they're intermingled and not always harmoniously. Among the large modern states, only Japan, really the sole exception, is ethnically homogeneous. The other, you point to think of any of them, and they are remarkably heterogeneous, and not necessarily do the various peoples like one another. It's too bad. When polities were small, as they were in the ancient republics and in the American colonies, direct rule by the people was at least possible. All the citizens of Athens or of a New England town could gather in one place and deliberate among themselves as to how to address issues of common concern. Because their numbers were small, citizens, ordinary people, had the chance to speak and to be heard. Yet because the modern state numbers in the tens or hundreds of millions, direct participation is impossible, except for that small fraction of elected people and activists, right? They have their say. The rest of us don't. Each citizen comes to compose an infinitesimal fraction of the whole. Not only does this place practical limits on direct participation, but it also makes it very difficult to resist the conclusion that any one individual is other than simply too insignificant to matter politically, and therefore one may be readily become passive. Right? I mean, it's more fun to watch Sunday night football than go to a meeting. It's hard to develop activity and energy among the citizens. We call them citizens, not subjects, as they would be called in a monarchy, and yet arithmetic really threatens to turn them into subjects, in fact, if not name. Thus, the claim of popular sovereignty does not per se protect us against autocratic rule. Okay. As this audience in particular well knows, to ensure peace and security, modern states must command and mobilize huge militaries. The 20th century became the most violent and destructive in human history as a result. But even if a state is peace-loving, it still must protect itself from other states that may not share its peaceful outlook, as Britain and France discovered to their sorrow in the late 30s and early 1940s, and that we are rediscovering now. To do so, it must match the military might of the most aggressive and powerful state that might threaten it. Lacking enormous military muscle, it will either be conquered or rendered subservient to a foreign power. And unlike pre-modern armies, and you guys know this better than I do, which were mobilized in haste and demobilized in peacetime, modern army forces today are professionals who remain permanently mobilized. Not only does this strain organizational capacity, but it imposes an enormous recurrent tax burden on the citizenry. Modern states require a level of routine coercive capacity unknown and unavailable to their pre-modern counterparts. It's tough to govern a modern state. And when you have the ambition to do so in a manner that comports with liberty and the voice of the people, it's even tougher. Right? It's not so tough for Putin can do it. Right? Putin can do it, but what a challenge we face when we have other things on our mind. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead here a little bit. Since they were crafting a constitution for what was clearly a modern state, the American framers gave great credence to reason, science, and universality. They were deeply influenced by the great classic liberal thinkers, Locke, Montesquieu, Hume, and but above all, Locke. Right. Federalist Papers quotes Montesquieu more, but if you read between the lines, it's Locke. The framers prided themselves on being enlightened and on freeing America from the shackles of feudalism and of founding what Madison called a new political science. As Lincoln stressed, they considered the self-evident rights enunciated in the Declaration of Independence as the unstated premise on which the Constitution was based. Their path diverged from the French because they did not aspire to transform human beings or human nature itself. They accepted human nature as it was, because they understood that human nature cannot be changed. They sought to devise a form of government that both relied on a pre-modern understanding of human virtue and sought to compensate for rather than extirpate human failings. In Federalist 51, which I think many of you have read, Publius recognizes that if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. But men are not angels and could not be made to be so. They are passionate, self-interested, and prone to forming factions. They desire power. Now, they are also virtuous, thoughtful, and public-spirited, but not reliably so. To succeed, government would have to adapt to this ambivalent reality. The framers built upon human virtue and sought to check human foibles. They allowed pre-modern qualities of human life to coexist with modern ones. Humans could aspire to knowledge and progress, even as they clung to religion, custom, and other non-rational beliefs and practices. The Constitution established a granular structure designed to promote deliberation, consensus, and public participation without surrendering the values of stability energy, and legitimacy. Conceding, by the way, that such a government might sometimes be slow to act. Right? This is, I think, so much at the heart of both the left and right critique of the constitutional order. Come on, guys, we got to make these things happen. You know, but people need stuff. Well, it seems to me what the framers really have to tell us is something has to be sacrificed a bit. We can't do things as quickly as we'd like. We really have to consult, 435 members of Congress have to think about it. Several states may have to think about it and may think about it in diverse ways. And, well, we have to live with that. So, of course, there's a sacrifice to be made. Okay. Additionally, the Constitution presupposes that there are some things the national government can do well and some things it cannot do well, and therefore should not attempt. Some things that are best left to other levels of government closer to the problem at hand. To use a simple example of what the framers had in mind, the federal government is demonstrably better at sending a man to the moon than it is at improving math and reading scores in local grade schools. Right? As once again we read about how all math scores in particular are declining. For all the, I would say, trillions of dollars that the federal government has expended in this cause. Government can and must remain energetic, but it can and should do so without undermining those constitutional arrangements that have made popular representative government possible in the world's second largest democracy. Maybe you can have somebody come speak about India, because they struggle with these things. The difficulty develops when judicial, presidential, and bureaucratic excesses and congressional inattention cause problems to be attacked with methods that distort constitutional forms and principles. Not only do those distortions threaten our liberty, but they are ineffective as well, and therefore sap government of the energy and the tax revenue, as well as the public confidence it needs in order to govern well. Okay. But this, passionate defense I'm making raises an important question. If the political order the Constitution provides for is so excellent, why has confidence in the constitutional design declined in modern times? And does this decline have something to do with the drastic decline in the level of trust that citizens accord their government? Those numbers are dreadfully low, trusting government. To further complicate the issue, the low level of trust, which I've mentioned, coexists with strong public support for the notion that the federal government should do even more to improve the lives of people. As my mentor, James Q. Wilson, observed, the traditional legitimacy barrier has been broken in modern times. The citizenry and its representatives no longer ask two questions about a proposed policy. Is it a good idea? Is it constitutional? They are content to ask only the former. And you see this in the press, right? The press, the media is totally uninterested in constitutional questions. They assume that every court decision is simply about the value or lack thereof of policies. Now, we're blessed with Supreme Court justices who know better, but the rest of the population, I don't think does know better. And that's terribly, terribly troubling. Not only do they limit rights claims nor do they limit rights claims to those included in the Bill of Rights, which places constraints on government, right? Thou shalt not get in the way of free speech, take people's guns away, and so it goes. Thou shalt not. No. Rather, they claim a right to such diverse things as better health care, shelter, clean environment, and equal access for the disabled, that only the apparently untrustworthy government can provide. In other words, not negative constraints on government as in the Bill of Rights, but positive requirements for government to do these things. Now, the legitimacy barrier decline has a long history, and I'm not going to take you through it all. Goes back to the Progressive era. The New Deal plays a role. The Great Society plays a role. It's a developmental process. But I think to understand the current state of things and why the Constitution, we don't quite recognize how things have to proceed constitutionally. There are some keys to solving that mystery. And I'm only going to mention some of them. Contemporary American government is unusually opaque, conducted largely out of sight and driven by legislation that is more often than not exceedingly long, excessively detailed, and therefore increasingly difficult for even the most well-informed citizens or for many congressmen to understand. The Wagner Act of 1936, which aimed to transform American labor relations, 8 pages long, right? Any of you can read it in 15 minutes and understand it. The Affordable Care Act of 2009, 906 pages long. Congressmen admitted they didn't read it. Not something to accuse them of. They were quite forthcoming. So that's a difficulty. And the real price tag of expansionary American public policy is greatly understated by two forms of what Chris DeMuth, a great student of these matters, calls taxation evasion. Deficit spending and regulatory policy. Due to the amassing of huge deficits that will only be paid by future generations, the public does not see the true cost of ever more expensive federal programs, and thus it is all the more willing to ignore the breakdown of the legitimacy barrier. This is especially true for the many citizens whose incomes do not generate any federal tax obligations. The public has the mistaken impression that government expansion is coming free of charge because the government does not pay for it. Well, eventually our grandchildren are going to pay, my grandchildren, maybe your children, are going to pay for this game. But people simply aren't aware of what things cost. And we can get away with this because the U.S. has such a great credit rating, right? You'll go out and spend money you don't have, and your credit rating will plummet, and you'll have to pay off. But as long as others, and I mean particularly the Chinese and the Saudis, and I guess the Emirates too, are prepared to give us that kind of credit, we're a pretty safe investment, this can go on. Okay. Regulatory policy is a little subtler. It hides the true cost of expensive programs by shifting the burden from the federal budget, right? The budget for things like environmental protection, occupational health and safety protection, protecting the disabled. These are not big federal budget items because we use the regulatory approach, right? States, localities, and private industries have to incur the expenses involved in these efforts, which are laudable. I'm not against these efforts, but nobody knows what they cost because they're not paying through their tax dollars, right? They are paying for it because, with only some exceptions, industry can pass costs on to the consumer. So you're shifting cost from taxpayers to consumers. I'm not sure that's very helpful. States and localities can't pass these costs on, and they suffer. Right? The budgetary situation in the various states is rather bad. Okay. Now, in this one case, I do want to praise the Trump administration. It's taken some very important actions to reduce government by regulation. But unfortunately, it often does so against the constitutional grain by ignoring the structures of the legal framework for doing this sort of thing. We have this marvelous law that nobody knows about except law students, I guess, the Administrative Procedures Act, which really does say if you want to initiate a regulation, here are all the steps you have to go through: hearing and comment, submission of drafts, revision of drafts. And of course, it's slow, but it offers incredible protections. Right? You ignore all that, you just allow these sort of efforts to be really not sufficiently targeted and not always well thought through. So I actually, I have a lot of respect for this aspect of the Trump administration, but you've got to do it the right way. Congress could but does not intervene. Originally devised as a means to prevent the Nixon administration. I'm going to go to yet another phenomenon that stands in our way. And my great colleague Shep Melnick calls it leapfrogging. Leapfrogging happens when agencies issue regulations that seem to stretch the meaning of what a regulation has to be. A regulation is not a law, right? A regulation is a way of telling the administrative agencies how to enforce the law. Okay, so, but the line between a statute and a regulation is gray, to put it mildly. Administrative agencies stretch that, courts back them up. So then the administrative agencies feel free to push the rock a little further, and on the whole, the courts have backed them up. Now there's an enormous shift going on at the moment, lest you think everything I have to say is so tearful. The Supreme Court has made two remarkable decisions, I think, that really are going to press the regulatory process to become less arbitrary and require greater congressional involvement. Okay, and I'll just discuss them briefly. Greg says I still have 13 minutes. I won't take it all, but I do want to stress these two court decisions because I think they really are remarkable. Okay, let me find my place again. Not here. Well, I can describe them. The first in time, that happened in time, which I still think is probably the most important is the West Virginia coal case, where the EPA had created regulations that were so extreme that essentially they were going to put an end to the coal industry and to coal-fired power plants. Now, that might be a good idea, although us East Kentuckians, I think, aren't so sure it's a good idea, but it could be a good idea. Do you want unelected administrative officials to decide the fate of an entire industry? The court said no. The court invoked something that I think is going to have enormous implications for the future, the major questions doctrine. The court says that if an administrative regulation is going to have an immense effect, and of course the language is very vague, that's why you guys could become lawyers, you can figure this out. If it's really going to have major impact on the political economy or the society of the country, it is the province of the Congress, and the agencies can't do it. I think this could be one of the best things that's happened in to restore a kind of constitutional order that I could point to. The other thing is that in an earlier decision in the 1980s, the so-called Chevron doctrine, the courts ruled that the tie goes to the runner, i.e., if there's a dispute about an agency action and the agency can show that there's some rationale behind what it's doing, it can do it. Wow. Right? I mean, these agencies aren't stupid, of course. They're going to put forward some kind of impressive defense of what they're doing. And now the court is saying, no. You really have to show that it's constitutionally appropriate, that it really can stand on the basis of sufficient evidence. No more deference to the agencies. So we may be in a transition here. I don't think the news is all bad. But right, the news is pretty bad. And what Trump has done that I think troubles me the most is that he has justified certain usurpations of power on the basis of emergency. Right? Emergency is the key to executive power. That's why we have a powerful executive. Because if we weren't facing emergencies, who needs this, right? We fought against a king. Well, who needs a new form of autocrat? But grudgingly, the framers recognized that there would be emergencies, that Congress was not equipped to handle emergencies, and so you have to have a powerful executive. Emergencies, right? His tariff plan, which the court has now, at least an appeals court has rebuked him on, is based on a law about international emergencies. Right? In wartime, in the face of great threat, the president can use various tools that would not otherwise be granted to him, including economic tools. Well, are you guys living through an emergency? Is Canada frightening you? I don't think so. I think that's the most extreme example. Another example, and the courts have been hard on him about this as well, has to do with deportations, right? We have procedures for deportation, right? Illegal aliens can be deported, but it's a grinding process. They are entitled to certain kinds of due process of law. They have to, a court rules on them. No, says Trump. Right? This is an emergency. There's the Venezuelan gang. I have their initials, but I've forgotten them. TDA. Right? They're creating an insurrection on the border. And they're not just a private gang, a bunch of gang hoodlums. They're somehow integrated into the Venezuelan state. Now, maybe that's true. If that's true, then I support Trump's efforts to deport them expeditiously. But he's offered no evidence. We have no proof or serious evidence put on the table that this gang is an agent of the Venezuelan government. Emergency. I keep coming back to that. Okay. And another example that disturbs me greatly. As a Jew, I am keenly aware of the dreadful anti-Semitic actions abetted and enabled by many universities, most famously the one across the river from me, Harvard. I have my doctorate from Harvard. I'm not inclined to be anti-Harvard. Columbia, UCLA, they did violate the civil rights of Jews and of others. And government can and should insist that the universities cease and desist from such abhorrent practices. But that does not justify blackmail. Right? In the face of resistance, especially from Harvard, Trump has withheld hundreds of millions of previously funded federal grants for vital scientific and medical research free of anti-Semitic taint. Right? If you're studying how to improve the vaccination process, that's good for Jews. We love that. Right? So why? It's blackmail. It simply isn't the way a rule of law operates. Of course, the public supports racial and gender equality, better schools, environmental quality, and aid for the physically and mentally disabled, among other things. But due to the opaque interaction of courts and bureaucrats and the mirage created by debt financing and off-budget regulation, it has no clear window into what policies actually are, how they operate, or what they cost. The public also supports curbing illegal immigration, freeing schools and colleges from ideological and religious intimidation, and fighting crime. The problem is how to make progress in these areas without falling afoul of the spirit and letter of the Constitution. Maintaining our liberty is simply more important than any particular policy improvement. Right? The only institution really capable of restoring a balance to press in a constitutional direction in so many of these spheres is the United States Congress. And so it's particularly good that we're talking in the McConnell Center. I think he tried real hard but he didn't have he was a general without enough infantry, right? The Congress has to step up to the plate. There's nobody else to do it. The courts are limited as they should be. Mindful of the possibility that federal officials, even the president, might be less than faithful in performing their assigned roles, the framers created Congress as the key countervailing power, expecting the ambitions of its members to drive them to fight against executive or judicial aggrandizement. The future of our constitutional republic rests on the willingness of Congress to reassert that noble ambition. Thank you.
Once again, thank you, Dr. Landy, for joining the McConnell Center for our 2025 Constitution Day dinner and for contributing to our lecture series. I especially appreciated your insight on the defense of constitutionalism and the importance of separation of powers within this. On behalf of the McConnell Scholars, staff, and the 2025 SBS cohort, thank you all for being a part of this evening, and thank you to those who are tuning in online. I hope you all enjoyed the lecture. Good night, everyone. Safe travels home. Soldiers, safe travels to DC this weekend. Thank you.